You're listening to the Omnicast. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Tyler Jacobson, with frequent guest Susan Berry of Hive Marketing.
Hello, Tyler Jacobson, and thank you once again for having me. This is the most exciting podcast episode in the history of time.
Is your adrenaline going?
I'm beside myself with excitement. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat. I'm drinking a beer to calm myself down.
Oh, man. I've got alcohol in here as well. Maybe I should grab some. So, Susan, remind everybody of what it is that you do.
Well, my company is Hive Marketing, and we help hotel owners, management companies, and brands improve top-line revenue results. So if there are sales, marketing, and revenue strategy problems in your hotel, I would love to help you fix them.
Wonderful. All right. This episode is going to be, by the way, I don't know. This could also be the worst episode of any podcast ever. It could be the best, but it could easily be the worst because I'm not even fully engaged on where I'm heading with this, but I know. So really I don't even want to give it away yet. We'll just hold on to it for a moment and we'll reveal what this episode is about slowly. But that is all to say that I am not prepared for this, and I might come out on the other end in a completely different spot.
Well, that's interesting and surprising.
No, I mean the core opinion probably is not.
Well, tell them what we're talking about.
No. But so my core opinion of all of this it's definitely not going to change. But in trying to apply it to marketing, I might find a new respect.
Well, I will find a new respect for you if you can apply this topic to marketing, because I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that, but I am ready to talk.
That's maybe the case that we have to make on this episode, is that everything is marketing, and that this battle royale where only one of us will remain standing. It has to take place, but the challenge is having it take place in the context of a marketing, of a marketing storyline, and what are the gifts and what are the problems.
Very interesting.
Last time on the last episode that you were on, I asked you to just visualize a funnel, and we were gonna now I want you to visualize something else.
Okay.
My eyes while I'm doing this. The year is 1972. The Vietnam War is raging. We have we're entering a recession, right? Because isn't that the malaise of the 70's, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's really a whole lot about the American story that any artist can take a lot from, and really kind of hold the mirror up to us and show us who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of middle-class white douchebags decide that they're going to hold up that mirror. Couple college kids, right? I think they were in college. I don't know. Maybe they were already in their 70's.
6 of one, half dozen the other in terms of this conversation.
But Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, they have the bravery to put out extremely generic music for other white people. And here's where we start.
So that is your take.
How is Steely Dan a marketing lesson?
Yes, for those following along at home, Tyler and I have known each other for the better part of 2 decades. And in the course of this 2 decades, we've had many ongoing arguments, but this is probably the most recurrent. And that is, what?
And the most entertaining.
I believe that Steely Dan is a national treasure, a fantastic band, worthy of admiration and respect. And Tyler believes they're generic douchebags. I'd like to introduce you to a website. It's called yourlogicalfallacyis.com, because calling someone douchebags is ad hominem debate. let's get to the meat of the issue. What should you really be talking about?
Okay, let's get to the crux of this episode happening at all and why we felt the need to actually have this discussion in public. It was a Facebook argument. I don't even remember what the Facebook argument was about at this point.
Steely Dan.
No, it wasn't. It didn't start with Steely Dan.
I don't remember.
Susan. Okay, and by the way, for listeners who don't, they may not know me as a human being. They know me as a marketer, the 10 people who listen to this podcast. So actually, they probably all know who I am. But my personal brand, which has been very carefully developed over a series of arguments and websites and podcasts and radio shows, I'm kind of, I have a reputation of being pretty mean when it comes to criticizing people's musical tastes.
Yes, you do.
To
the point that my husband was afraid for me to have this conversation with you because he was afraid you would hurt my feelings. I know that will not happen.
If I hurt your feelings, it's unintentional. Well, I mean, I want to be funny probably, but I don't want to actually want to hurt your feelings.
Fantastic.
I just want you to take your Asia CD and throw it away.
Not going to happen, and I have it on vinyl, thanks.
And by the way, that's not Asia, the supergroup from the 80s. It's AJA, the Steely Dan album. That has Hey 19 on it. Is that correct?
I think Hey 19 is your favorite Steely Dan song.
No, actually, my favorite Steely Dan song is Big Black Cow. Because really, again, 1972, Vietnam, we're a struggling nation trying to heal divides. And yeah, Donald Fagen comes in and he tells us what we all need to hear.
Okay.
Take your big black cow and get out of here. Okay, so again, can we put this in a marketing context?
I don't know. Okay, so here's part of it. You were listening to your audience of your carefully curated brand, which is musical snob / dickhead. I'm just kidding.
It's fair.
And I am part of that audience. And I expressed a thought that seemed to differ from what most of the members of your audience feel, which is
my perception.
I did.
And possibly created some cognitive dissonance that made me lean in.
Yes. And what I said was that Steely Dan is subversive to the point of being more punk than punk rock. That's a bold statement. I'll give you that.
I want to meet your dad just so I can punch him in the face because you said that.
I didn't get it from my dad. I got it from my friend.
I don't care where you got it from. I want your dad to suffer.
Okay, let me ask you a question. What?
I'd want to go punch your kid.
Okay.
Because
I would definitely pass this gene, the Steely Dan loving gene along.
I wouldn't punch your kids or your dad.
Appreciate it. Here's the question for you. What?
Am I supposed to just let that fly right now and not?
I know that it was too bold of a statement, so okay, what do you got?
Just wanting to whack that hornet's nest. As you're typing it, you're like, this is going to piss Tyler off.
And Sarah. Yes, that was exactly my point.
So again, knowing your audience, really, that's really important. And then saying something not necessarily even to your audience, but really you're speaking to them because you're speaking in a language that you know they'll hear and react to. Yes. So I think that there's also a good marketing lesson in that. If you know who you're speaking to, and you can, and again, you don't have to address them specifically, but you can say something provocative that you know they'll react to.
Yes. And sometimes people are provocative because they have a separate agenda, which in this case is getting this podcast on the air. I don't think that makes sense.
But we're trying, and I think that's the important part. But again, I mean, saying something provocative that really, speaks to your audience, like when Donald Fagen, as a 70-year-old man, wanted a 19-year-old to take him away. And by the way, he's been 70 the whole time. The whole time. In every one of these. When he was in college in a band with Chevy Chase on drums, he was 70 years old.
I mean, you're not wrong. I don't think that you're incorrect about this. So here's my question for you.
Yes.
Aside
I
from
haven't mentioned Joe Strummer's name in response to your punk rock comment there, and we're going to get to that.
I don't even know what to say because I knew I was pushing it there. But I will tell you why I think that. I think that your dislike of Steely Dan is because you're viewing that band through a modern lens. And I think the difference is that when they came out on the scene, the landscape was completely different. They're the first band to ever to fuse jazz and rock and roll together. They're seriously the biggest musical snobs and purists in the history of time, and I'll tell you why in just a second. And their lyrics are truly fucked up. They're extremely subversive. They write about topics in this sort of melodious elevator music sounding way that are like legit sinister. All of those things I think are arguments in my favor. What you got?
Give me a sample of the subversive lyrics. Because I have listened to their lyrics, and unless I'm just taking everything at face value, I'm like, wow, you couldn't be like you're making milk. Like I don't even want to say it, but yes, like it couldn't be more toothless.
Okay, so let's start with their name. Steely Dan
It's a vibrator,
is a sex toy.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello. People didn't talk about sex toys on podcasts in the 70s.
They didn't have podcasts in the 70s.
Right. You made my point for me.
I don't know where you're going with that.
They have all these songs that are about like pedophiles and fucked up people and sort of the marginal and sinister characters of society. And I mean, this is when people were writing disco songs about like it's raining men, you know? I think the subject matter of Steely Dan lyrics is extremely interesting. Pearl of the Quarter is a great example and one of my favorite Steely Dan songs. It's about a sex worker and someone who comes back to see her again and again and again and again. There's not a lot of songs like that in the 70s.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe it is.
The point being that their subject matter.
Maybe it's Judy's been working for the drug squad for for the banker set. I don't know.
I would just say if you gave the lyrics a listen, you would encounter unsavory characters that you would be surprised, but you wouldn't be as surprised now because you're viewing it through a modern lens. But when they came on the scene, this was like new, fresh, and unheard of.
No, okay. It's not Aqualung.
Well, I'm not
running down his nose and eyeing little girls, and then or what about Uncle Ernie by the Who, which I believe it predates. I think Tommy predates Steely Dan, and Uncle Ernie was a guy who had a summer camp where he was molesting all the kids. Like, I mean, you're gonna find the Beatles have songs about savory characters.
But I think the difference here is the juxtaposition of this sort of music that sounds very unthreatening and light with this incredibly crazy subject matter.
I will challenge you right now. All right, let's go to the bonus round. So
I have a question for you too, so don't forget.
I won't forget. I'll let you ask a question.
Okay.
All right, but I've always said the reason I love soul music is the same reason that I love the Smiths, because the lyrics are very sad. Sometimes they're talking about some very traumatic subject matter, but the music is very peppy and uplifting. I mean, again, being a soul DJ, I can tell you that you have danced to more songs about guys beating up women.
Yeah.
Just through soul music. And you're talking about 1962, probably to about 1974. There's a great song out there called I'm Gonna Fix You Good. Oh, it's such a great song. It's so upbeat, and it's all about when you get home, I'm going to beat you up because I know you've been running all around town. Yeah.
What's the
So bad.
one that's the girl group and it's like something something when he hits me. Do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember the
Oh,
name
are
of
you
it.
thinking about Then He Kissed Me? And Then He
No,
Kissed Me?
maybe. I don't know,
Uh,
but it's same vein.
there's a song called Mean Man by Betty Harris. Love that song. And it's all about, like, I really can't quit you, even though you're really mean to me and
Yeah.
you abuse me. Yeah. So it's not new. I mean, that's not inventive. But again, if we take this back to a marketing lesson, yes, that wasn't really, I mean, outside of the soul genre, and I'm sure that you had some Southern rock stuff that was kind of like that.
Hmm.
Maybe. I don't know. And it might be a little early for Southern rock at the beginning of the 70s. So yes, Steely Dan is maybe bringing that to a culture that hadn't quite had that delivered to them by another white guy.
Hmm.
Right? They'd only heard of that from other segments of society that didn't necessarily reflect who they are.
I
So
think
I'll
you're
take
right.
that.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Here's my question for you. And I'm not exactly sure how to ask this, but because it's so subjective. But when you decide that you like or don't like music, is it about, I don't know, like what it sounds like or the genre? Is it about the lyrics more? Is it about what it evokes emotionally? Or are you even able to answer that question? Like for me, it's typically about what it evokes emotionally plus lyrics. The music part, of course, I want to like what it sounds like, but I'm not a musician, so I don't know if someone's a good musician or not. I can't tell. I'm not
I don't think it
discerning.
matters. I don't think it matters if somebody's a good musician or not, for whatever that's worth. I was lucky, and you know what? Yes, this is how it appeals to marketing, right? There's going to be a translation here to marketing, and I'm started to really believe that virtually everything that we experience comes back to feel. First and
Mm-hmm.
foremost, everything is about feel. So you can go into that feel and you can try and find data that back ends it, right? Oh, I feel this way because X, Y, and Z makes it make sense to feel that way. Or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, right. And I think that we're going to be looking for evidence as to why we feel that way and to justify why we feel that way. So
That's totally right on.
so when we talk about this, Steely Dan doesn't feel right to me. Now, I can go
Mm-hmm.
out there and I can tell you it's because all I can picture are fern bars and dudes wearing
The Regal Beagle.
absolutely, right? Larry, right? Larry from Three's Company. That's all I
Yes.
can picture is like
Yes.
that guy hanging out and being cool, right? And Rupert Holmes' Pina Colada song. Like it all kind of falls into that same
Mhm.
space for me where it's like, wow, you're a bunch of boring garbage people. And
Well,
you're
I like all of that yacht rock music, first of all, but that's not
I like yacht rock, by the way.
that's not the emotion that it is evoked for me. And so I have a sort of a two-part road that I want to use to explain this. So the first part is that musical proficiency does not mean much to you or I. It does mean a lot to some super music nerdy people with whom I have spent a tremendous amount of time in my life. So, like serious classical musicians and serious non classical musicians who are like fully in it for the proficiency, for lack of a better word. And those dudes like Steely Dan because they think they're super proficient, talented musicians. But what's interesting is that Donald Fagen and
Walter Becker.
Walter um, would not play on their studio albums. They would audition sometimes up to 50 guitarists for a specific song to perform one song on one record. Like that's how big of purists they were, that they wanted the sound to be so perfect. I think that's such an interesting thing. That's not why I like them, but I just think it's an interesting piece of information. Like,
I feel like it's the antithesis to your punk rock argument.
I think it's not necessarily the antithesis, and here's why. Because they were in it for the expression of the music, not for making themselves famous, not for the performative aspects of writing a song, but because they just could not help wanting to get Hey 19 out on the page.
Bullshit.
Why?
Because Interpol, when they came out, Depeche Mode, when they came out, both of them very intentionally wanted to hide who they were. Mm-hmm. They did not want people to know them as faces. They wanted people to know them as through the music first. Mm-hmm. So even finding a photo of Interpol was pretty difficult early on. And same with Depeche Mode when they were doing People Are People. Like you heard that all over the radio, but you didn't see videos and things like that. It wasn't as or at least wasn't very highly distributed. We don't have that same level of anonymity with the members of Steely Dan. And by the way, the two primary members of Steely Dan, even though that there were regular other people, including Bernard Purdie, who is just an incredible drummer who says that he drummed on Beatles albums. I mean, you had other people in the mix. Mm-hmm. So, but I would say that like you said, they would audition up to 50 people. Who were those 50 people and why aren't we knowing their names? Especially if they nailed Hey 19 so well.
Okay, I'll take that. That's a good point. All right, so here's the other thing.
Okay.
So I said that the proficiency of these dudes is one of the reasons why all these nerdy music people that I've hung out with my entire life were super into them. But the reason that I'm super into them is because of what was going on in my life when those songs were introduced. So like that's the thing. It's the emotional evocativeness of a particular song being attached to a moment in time. Pearl of the Quarter, I mentioned earlier, is a fantastic Steely Dan song, made all the more fantastic because I heard it after going on a trip to New Orleans with some friends.
Okay. So have you ever attempted to separate yourself from that subjectivity and try and...
you can.
That's not what I asked. I know you can't. I recognize that. But have you ever attempted to? Have you ever attempted to hear it as with fresh ears?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So you can't release yourself from that. You simply can't. You haven't even attempted to release yourself from that subjectivity. And I don't know that you could. I don't know that you could. I've definitely had to go back and reevaluate some of the things that I love simply because they existed in a certain point of time and go, yeah. I mean, have you ever watched a movie that you were like, oh man, I watched this movie like 300 times when I was 12 years old. I want to go watch it again. And you're like, oh boy, I didn't age well.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know why I liked it back then.
But right? I think that I don't know how to exactly articulate this, but I think that there is something different about how music lives in memory than how a movie or a novel or whatever it is. Like I've read many novels many times that I don't have the same feeling for them as I did before, but I don't think I have songs like that. Maybe I do. I should think about this more.
But I think that I think it's absolute bullshit that we would even put the words punk rock and Steely together, and that's even a moment for a topic of conversation. It's fucking
subversive. Subversive is what I was going for.
But it's not subversive. It's not subversive. No, it's not. I already gave you examples of how this was being done in other genres.
It doesn't matter.
And if you're saying that they invented the genre, by the way, if you're saying they invented the genre, then of course they're going to be the first ones to do it.
Right. And are only one person allowed to be subversive in a thing before everything else is not subversive anymore?
It's not subversive. It's defining that genre for all of the Larrys from Three Company.
Well, I think it's two things. I think they defined a genre, number one, and I think they were. And I don't
even know. I don't know enough about crap rock to have decided if they've defined that genre.
You continually revert to the logical fallacies instead of presenting arguments that are not attacks based on ad hominem characteristics.
It's all, everything about this is subjective, and that's the beautiful thing about it. That's actually why I enjoy arguing about. No, it is. I mean, it's um again, let's jump back here and let's tie this back into marketing, because that's what we're trying to do.
Yes, very poorly.
So actually, there's two ideas here. One is that we should have an objective. How do we know if we've actually completed this conversation to an end that is acceptable? Every campaign, everything that we take on should have an objective, and it should be defined up front.
Call to action.
Doesn't necessarily need a call to action, but it does need an objective, because we are trying to solve for what? Why are we having this conversation, and how do we know when we've actually achieved that?
Well, we are trying to solve what?
Or if we're on the road to achieving it.
Okay. What we are trying to solve for is unsolvable. And that is to make a square peg fit into a round hole. But I think what we can solve for is the marketing lesson in this. So do you remember earlier when we were talking about how and I think you agreed with me about this, that the thing that makes you love a song is the emotion that it evokes?
I'm going to jump back to that. Yes.
And it's subjective, as you just said. So is there a lesson here in terms of messaging around emotion that is objective or exclusionary?
Objective or exclusionary? Yeah, I need you to fill that out more for me.
So in other words, that says nobody likes dirty counters. This is the dumbest example I could ever think of. P.S. So bear with me. Nobody likes
one of their hits. Likes dirty counters.
Nobody likes dirty counters. It makes everyone feel sad. Well, except for maybe it doesn't. Like if you're a hoarder, you're totally cool with dirty counters. So a hoarder shouldn't be marketed that way. You see what I'm saying? This is the worst example I could ever think of. I got to think of a better one. But in terms of content or messaging, that you need to be careful not to cross someone's emotional lines because they are subjective.
I love the gymnastics involved with this. This is so much fun for me.
I'm trying so hard, man. I love Steely Dan.
No, let's.
This is the worst show ever, by the way.
I also love the Steely Dan song "A Hoarder Wouldn't Care." That was my favorite Steely Dan song.
We always got a spit take for the YouTube channel.
Oh man, am I even recording this? Yes, I am. Okay.
Maybe what our objective is to write a Steely Dan song and have it performed.
I'm not auditioning up to 50 musicians who you'll never hear from again.
Exactly.
But let's jump back to that, because I do think that there is an important lesson for everything here, right? Which is that, one, it is subjective. Mm-hmm. And that's actually why I love arguing about this stuff, because there's not really there's not a right way. And so when you argue subjective things as if they are objective, as if there's a correct way to view these things, the response isn't, I'm going to ignore that. The response is, what the fuck? I mean, right?
That's what I was trying to say about the dirty counters, and I said it in the shittiest way possible. But yes, presenting something as fact that is
it's subjective.
Yeah.
Right. And was Dirty Counters the greatest hits album, or?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We've got 15 minutes of comedy coming at you hot.
We were about 30 minutes into this thing. All right. So, but again, yes. So when you are taking something that's subjective, everybody can, and treat it as objective, everybody can chime in, and everybody wants to chime in, because now you're saying, this is how it is. You either are on board and you're like, yep, see, that's how it is. Or you want to argue with it, right? But you're compelled into action. There's something there. There is some sort of marketing lesson in there, in just taking that position and holding strong to it, and then trying to backfill it and let all those other voices be heard.
Let's try to think of what's a product that has benefited from controversy.
Oh, that's benefited from controversy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so I was going to say that that was one of the things that I was actually going to give him is when you are a polarizing when you're polarizing and when you've taken a side on something, and again you don't waver from it, you
Mm-hmm.
are creating camps, you're creating tribes, and you're saying you either speak, we are a tribe that speaks together, or not. When we go to products, Chick-fil-A, I hate to say it, but yes, absolutely, they have benefited, but they've also probably um, they've been hurt from it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But those people who are like, I'm gonna keep eating at Chick-fil-A because they believe in the same things that I believe in, right?
Dagnabbit, yeah. What
Um,
about people who deliberately stirred up controversy? The only one I can think of is
My Pillow,
what?
the My Pillow guy who's a diehard Trump supporter.
Oh, I don't know about that. I was thinking more like Carl's Jr. with their super pornography-esque commercials. So not, people who thought they were hot wanted to eat Carl's Jr., but then people who were like, this is appalling, we're talking about Carl's Jr. Is that maybe that's an example of courting controversy in order to benefit your brand?
Yeah, and I'm sure if we wanted to, I'm sure we could find a bunch of examples of that have taken
Mm-hmm.
place. But a lot of them are kind of minor. These things they don't stick with us. They don't necessarily shape
Mm-hmm.
our culture.
Hmm.
So it's difficult for me to just sit here and recall it. But yes, I think that idea that like we're going to take a stand and it will be controversial. That's why we're taking a stand. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something there.
Hmm.
I did want to jump back to feel though, and I did want to talk, and I want to talk about aspiration as well, because I was speaking. I had the pleasure of being able to sit with the CEO of Macintosh Audio and the team behind Project USA. They make these great record players.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were talking, the CEO of Macintosh Audio, his name is Jeff. He's like, it all comes back to, does it feel good? And I'm like, it was so nice to hear somebody in your position say that, by the way, because I went to the North American musical instrument merchants conference. It's called NAM, and it's a big deal. And when I was there, one of the things that bummed me out was it all came down to black boxes and then the numbers attached to those black boxes, how many ohms and how many amps and things like that. And it's like, I don't care about that. I want you to evoke a feeling. I want you to evoke a passion because that's really
Mm-hmm.
the important thing to me at the end of the day. I took Sarah to a concert with this musician, and this had to have been probably close to 20 years ago now too, and we didn't really know what to expect, and what we got was a very, very proficient musician essentially masturbating with his instrument. And I don't mean that in a sexual way, but I mean, like he was just showing, look at how technical I can be,
Uh-huh.
and the music was garbage. And it's like, I don't care how technical you are. I'm sure it's impressing you, and sure it's impressing somebody in this audience. But for the most part, it's just boring,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're not bringing me something that lifts my spirit or lifts my aspirations and my hopes and things like that.
Or it makes me feel anything at all. That's the worst, right?
Well, that's the opposite of love. It's
Yeah, yeah.
indifference. Steely Dan does not provoke indifference from me.
Exactly. That's why I think you're just 10 minutes away from falling in love with Steely Dan, and
I'm
I'm going to
not gonna
make you a mixtape this weekend.
I think you're reeling in the years.
That's a
Okay.
good song. How do you not like
No,
that song? What?
it's not.
Why would you not like it? It's
It
okay.
just
See?
doesn't it just doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't speak to me. It doesn't speak to my experience. The musicianship doesn't draw anything out of me.
Uh-huh.
It
You know
doesn't
what I
address
think is
it doesn't
funny?
address my sadness, my rage, my pleasure, none of that.
I think what's funny is that um like clearly I put on a show of being a rabid Steely Dan fan, but people don't really have strong feelings about Steely Dan one way or the other. Like Steely Dan is background music. It's background music in your life. It's only when a song gets plucked out of that background and given some sort of emotional context that kind of music really makes a difference. Don't you think?
It almost makes me think that that's why it always feels like bullshit. Because it is bullshit. Like you're saying, like nobody is like and by the way, somebody is a rabid Steely Dan fan.
Oh yes, lots of people
Somebody
are.
is. Right. I mean, pick the band. There's somebody who's, if
Totally.
they've achieved any level of fame, there is someone out there right now is like the world's biggest Enough Zenith fan, right? That exists.
Yes,
It
yes.
matters to somebody, but for most people, it's like, how are you defending this blandness? How are you defending this 5 on a scale of 10?
Right.
Like, do you
Totally.
really? This is what we're arguing about, and you're going to defend it. It's not that we're arguing; it's that you're going to defend that. In a
And
world where
so
Joe Strummer lived, you're going to defend Walter.
and what I would say to that is I'm ultimately defending the experiences that I have attached to certain songs that have made me love those songs.
And so that was where I was going to go also in this. I didn't have many points, but you're complimenting them quite well. But one of them was when your product, which their music is a product, and I think this is a lot easier to do with art, but maybe there's other examples of it happening with product or service where it's, you know what? I can actually even tell you when, but again, it's still art, so never mind. But when it can represent something different than to somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it has different application. What they initially intended when they were writing those songs and the way that you've applied it and the way you interpret it are completely different. Now you own a piece of that in a completely different way than anybody else. It's a very personal thing.
Yes.
Right. So the more that you can make that a part of your experience, the more that you can interpret it in a very personal and unique way, the more importance it has. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
There's a huge marketing lesson there.
I don't know how you would leverage it, honestly. But yes, I think
there has to be. I mean, think about things like Harley Davidson, where people get a brand name tattooed on their skin.
Yeah. So now, okay, yes. So it's going to come back to lifestyle branding. Mm-hmm. Any way that you can actually apply that lifestyle branding, you're going to have that thing that means something different, right? Mm-hmm. So Penguin is actually, I'm wearing a Penguin shirt right now.
Hello there.
So I will, they should sponsor me. One, so I don't have to spend money on Penguin stuff all the time. But I love fashion, and so now I apply that to me. That brand definitely represents me in some ways.
Interesting.
Right? It's personal. I like it, and it helps define me. And I even put on a different shirt. I don't wear only Penguin, but I tried like a cowboy shirt from a local Colorado brand called Rockmount yesterday. Mm-hmm. And everybody from my wife to some friends, they were like, that looks good on you. And I went and I put it on and I'm like, it just doesn't feel like me, to the point that even though other people say it looks nice on me, I don't want to do it. So I didn't buy it. Right. So Penguin has some sort of access to who I am that I would say other brands, even when I'm told it looks nice on me, they don't have that same access.
What do you think it is? What do you think that brands what speaks to you about it? Is it the styles of the clothes? Is it that they're hard to find? Is it that it's expensive or prestigious?
I think that there's definitely something that feels very and this is one of the, I don't want a whole podcast talking about me and my Too
late.
I sort of do. Right. No, there's a side of me that says tradition is just dead man's baggage and it's BS and we shouldn't necessarily have to be indebted to traditions. Mm-hmm. But the other side of me is, I think, especially when it comes to fashion, I grew up thinking James Dean and Elvis looked really cool, right? And so any of that kind of fashion, those fashion trends and those kind of accents that existed maybe mid-50s and have endured all the way through here. Okay. Like I like that. And I feel a lot more comfortable addressing some of that. Yeah.
Got it. That's so interesting. Okay. I don't know Penguin except for I recognize the Penguin, right? But so it wouldn't have occurred to me that it's sort of that continuity of style. That's really cool. That's interesting.
Yeah. And so they're like my Steely Dan, really. No.
And ladies and gentlemen, it's come full circle. Thanks for tuning in and have a wonderful day reeling in the years.
No, I'm not going to close it on that. You said
Damn
Steely Dan
it.
was punk rock, and God damn it, that is wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong.
I didn't
Okay,
say they were
it has
punk rock.
more
I said
it
they
has
were
more to do.
subversive.
No, you said it. You used the words punk rock because there's no way in hell I would have ever entered those two words into a
I
conversation about
I
Steely
know.
Dan.
But I
You did.
said it as it was an analogy. So I think what I said was their lyrics were more subversive than punk rock. Who cares?
Do you still? Was that just to provoke me?
Of course it was. Have you met me? We're
All right.
like the same person. Of course I was just provoking you. Come on.
I know. Okay, so again, let's just try and sum this all up so we
Okay.
can all get on with our fucking lives.
Do so.
Okay.
I'm ready to take notes.
All right, Steely Dan. What are the marketing lessons? One, being polarizing.
Mm-hmm. Being careful to recognize that people bring their own emotions and experiences to a product or song in this case.
Is that why be careful? Why do you use the word careful there?
Because you might make an assumption that everyone feels one way about something and they don't. For example, when your friends post about Steely Dan on your page, they're making the assumption that everyone in that audience feels the same way you do, which is like dorky, terrible, awful. And then here I come, popping right up to provoke the crap out of everyone.
But you're compelled to. That's the marketing lesson there. I don't even know if it's be careful.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
It's almost like invest in that, right?
Well, I think both. I think it depends on the audience, because not everyone, and certainly not in every situation would I be comfortable making that statement with a stranger. I never would. I would never.
So on that Story Brand podcast, there was an episode and they were talking about the best types of salespeople, and they went into all of these different kind of archetypes of salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
And one was like the relationship builder, and one of them was I can't remember. They had a bunch of them, but they said which one sells the best, and everybody thought it was going to be the relationship builder, and okay. Well, so what's the archetype that sells best?
The challenger.
There you go. Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's where that aligns there, is like if you come in and you challenge somebody's beliefs, you're almost prompting them into action.
Mm-hmm.
And going back to other podcast episodes, when we were talking about branding a few episodes back, we were talking about brands doing their own branding. And I said, the thing that I don't like about that is that when those brands show up and they want to be accommodating to everybody, we are everybody's, provider of paper products. I don't know. Right. No, that's not going to prompt me in. If you are there for everybody, then you're very generically there for me. You're not specifically there for me. But if you can divide me into a camp that says, no, you're our people, you're going to get my attention.
Exactly. There's nothing to pull you in. Right.
Exactly. All right.
Totally agree. What
else do we have? Or was that really it?
I think that's it. But I think for this episode.
Feel has everything. Yes, feel has something to do with this, right?
Yes.
And that might be the most important part of any interaction is, does it feel right?
Yes.
You can make and let people come up to their own versions of and back in their own reasoning into it as to why they feel something. Because if you can make them feel positively about something, then they will go out and do their own internal homework to try and justify that feeling.
Totally true. I'm a perfect example of this today. I did all this homework to explain to you why Steely Dan is great, when the bottom line is the songs bring back emotions and experiences that I had, and that's it. I don't care if they're good at playing their instruments or whatever the thing.
They didn't even play their instruments on most of their studios. Right. They had they auditioned up to like 50 people.
50 people for every song and every instrument. All right. I want to make a suggestion for wrapping up this episode.
Please.
And it is, because we were so all over the place, but because we also both feel very passionately about this topic, I think we should do a call for audience reactions. So both when people listen to the podcast, if they've got any marketing lessons from Steely Dan, or probably more appropriately from Tyler's and my argument about Steely Dan, I would love to hear that. And then also, when you and I post this on social, I think we should ask people, like, what are the things that you think an argument about music that two people feel very differently about can teach you about marketing? That's a terrible question, but
I love that call to action, how it takes up 4 lines. I think it's great. But no, yes. What can an argument like this actually, what is there a marketing lesson that maybe we haven't? Yeah, I like that. Okay. Can we just wrap this up? Oh my gosh, this was at once wonderful. I imagine it's probably boring as hell, or it's very exciting as hell. I really don't know.
I think it's going to be a good test case to see. And quite frankly, I hope that it didn't record, and then we can do it again now that we've done it one more time in a much more organized way.
I mean, that's the problem, though, is it's like a 2-minute episode if we redo this, because we've already we actually went down that journey, right?
Yes. Backjack. Do it again.
I do want to say that I've gotten feedback this week that from two separate people that they've been listening to the podcast.
Fantastic.
Which is like a big win for me.
That is a big win. I've been listening to it. It's funny, when we were texting about recording these, your voice was in my ears because I was listening to a couple of the most recent episodes. So I was like, oh, he can tell I'm listening to his podcast. He sent me a text. This is so weird.
So it's actually, there might actually be people out there to give us some feedback on this. And
fantastic.
Or what I'm saying is, all of the people that we've got listening to the podcast, I think this episode has ruined it, and I've probably lost all of the subscribers.
The audience has now left the building.
All we know is something's going to change.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to hear the feedback. I thank you for indulging my desire to have this conversation, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you, Susan Berry of Hive Marketing. You can find Susan at
hive-marketing.com.
And please find me at omniphonic.com, and give us a review, give us a rating, send us feedback. Tell us which one of us is wrong so we can just put this to rest.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Next time. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.